Inside the X is a short newsletter every Friday designed to give you some fun right before the weekend. It'll include links to blog posts, articles, books, quotes, and recent purchases I've made. Everything is handpicked to add value to your life. To join, email entertainmentxpodcast@gmail.com.
Good morning, Vietnam!
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
To infinity and beyond!
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
It's classified.
You talking to me?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I can't fly!
Expecto Patronum!
Entertainment X.
You never know what you're gonna get.
For this episode, I sit down with Matthew Montgomery, and we talk about the film industry. He's a writer, director, producer, and he actually wrote and directed a film called Devil's Path, which we spend a good amount of time talking about. I was very interested in how he created the story and then went about assembling everyone on the project. So we talk about that. We talk about some challenges that he's faced in the past, and also his methods of operation, how he goes about creating. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did having the conversation with Matthew. Keep on keeping on. We're back, and today with me is Matthew Montgomery on the phone. Matthew, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So you're friends with JD Scalzo. You guys have actually worked together, and I had him on a week or two ago, and your name came up a few times before, during, and after our conversation. So I thought it would be great for you and me to sit down and continue the conversation of filmmaking. So,
Great. Yeah. Love JD.
Yeah, good guy. So you guys work together on Devil's Path, and that's something you created. Correct.
Yes. Yeah, me and I also had a co-writer, Stephen Tordokas, who plays the other lead opposite JD.
Okay.
In the movie.
How long did it take you to write it?
It started out, I was in grad school at the time, so it took me a little bit longer than I think normally I spend writing a screenplay. It took me a couple years, I feel like, to really kind of get it to where it ended up being to be ready for production.
Okay. Did you start, now I'm so curious about this, with your education and what you've learned about screenwriting, how did you start creating it? Was it like beginning, middle, end, or did you start with a screenplay, or like did you use index cards to figure out scenes? What was your process?
A little bit of all of that.
Cool.
What I like to do is first, if I have an idea, I usually start out with an idea. I knew that I'd done this short film in school, and it revolved mostly around these two characters. And so I knew I wanted to sort of expand on a relationship between two characters that were like two sides of the same coin, and put them in a place where they could be isolated and have something really crazy happen to them and figure out how they would respond to that situation. And I knew I wanted the characters to be gay. So I wanted this to be a gay thriller specifically.
Yeah.
And then when I started figuring out what the story was going to be, I usually start out with a log line. Like I just smack it down and just figure out what is the base. If I could, encapsulate it in one line, what is the beginning, middle, and end of what happens? And then from there, I try to break it down into what happens first, then what happens, and then what's the last thing that happens. And then from there, I take that and I expand it again. And eventually I work my way to this index card thing, which, I lay out the entire 3-act structure and go scene by scene. And then I get really specific about each scene, what the conflict is, whether who's driving the scene, whether the character goes from a positive emotion to a negative emotion or vice versa, all those kinds of things. It gets really sort of nerdy.
Yeah, no, and this stuff fascinates me because it's a lot of work, and you have to do that. That takes a lot of self-discipline to write a film. So,
yeah.
what was your writing process with your partner? Did you guys do all of that together, or did you come together at the the final stages of like kind of creating dialogue?
It's sort of, he came in sort of in the middle. I had already sort of started teasing out this story, and I may have even already written a rough draft. And then he came in, and everything just sort of changed after that. But how we worked was we would sit down and sort of brainstorm the story together. And since I knew at the time, I knew from the beginning that Stephen was going to be playing the character of Noah. I could talk to him about specific character things and the character's journey. And so we were able to have those conversations. And so from there, once we got to a point where we were really kind of starting to, once we had a working draft and we were starting to revise it and go through the revision process, then we started sort of splitting up the work back and forth. He would take one part of the story, I would take the other part of the story, and then we would switch and then look at each other's scenes and sort of edit each other's scenes and sort of start to bring it together, so that when you look at the story now, there really is no, where my stuff started or where his stuff started. It's all sort of the same. It all ends up blending together.
That's a really interesting method. I like that. Did you guys did you have to work on like keeping emotions in check when getting feedback on your creation? Because I know writing can be a bit vulnerable. I've written a few things, and I notice like when I go through it and read it, it's almost like I got to say, okay, the feedback is to help me. And I'm just kind of curious if you've ever even encountered that.
I mean, my background is acting, so I feel like I'm so used to being criticized constantly. So, there's nothing that I feel like anybody can say that's going to sort of, knock me to the ground. I usually take what everybody says as with a grain of salt, and then really try to specifically apply things that are coming up consistently. Like if there's something that comes up consistently over and over again, then I know, okay, this is something I really need to take a look at. But it's best to just not take any of it personally. Everybody's got their own perspective about a story.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to rewind a little bit. We're going to do a little jumping around here. You started out acting in film?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what age was that?
I was about like, when I was 18, I guess you could say I started, doing small things like small shorts and stuff like that. But then, it was probably when I was, like 20, like when I was in my mid 20s, and I really started working consistently as an actor, and then just started doing a lot of independent films. So initially I was really just an actor. I mean, that's all. That was sort of why I came out here and what I wanted to do my whole life and all of that.
Where were you born and raised?
In Texas, down by Corpus Christi, which is down by the Gulf. So
I know exactly where that is. Okay, so are you like a one-off in your family of being in entertainment?
Yeah, I'm the only one in my family. My dad was an artist for many years. He was a painter. And so, like, I think I sort of got my artistic sensibility and creative spark from him a lot of times. I was just sort of surrounded by artists and actors and filmmakers and writers and stuff my whole life since I was little, because those were the people that my dad hung out with. So I think I sort of always kind of had that kind of around me.
Yeah. So then what was the transition for you with acting into writing, directing, producing, et cetera, et cetera?
I honestly had never even thought of it. It was not something that was in the forefront of my mind for the longest time. Okay. I had people, directors and stuff tell me when I was younger, oh, if you thought about being a director, you might look into directing. And I never really took it seriously. It was not something that I was interested in at the time. I just wanted to act. But then as I got older, and then I started working more, I started, when you're on more sets, I think you start taking in sort of what production is like. And when I started working with Guest House Films, which is this independent production company that makes a lot of LGBT films,
Yeah.
the first movie that we worked on together, that I was the lead on, they asked me to come in and co-produce it with them. And so I said yes for some reason. But I think I did, I went into it. I felt like I was sort of thrust into it initially.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like I knew what I was doing. But then, after you've been on set a few times, actors know a lot more than I think they give themselves credit for. By the time that I started producing, I had already been on a lot of sets. I knew how things ran. I knew what worked and what didn't work. I paid attention when I was on set.
Yeah.
So, I just applied a lot of what I learned to my first experience as a producer, and then I learned a lot. I mean, it was a big, steep learning curve for me to figure out all of the logistics and all of the technical stuff with putting a production together. So that was sort of my intro into flipping from acting to producing. And then when I started thinking about writing wasn't until a few years later. The two guys who run Guest House Films are both writers, and I really look up to them. And I started feeling inspired to kind of write my own thing, write my own stories.
Yeah.
And I've always just had a thing for writers. And so I decided to take a crack at writing a screenplay. And so I did, and it sort of came out really sort of naturally for me, and it didn't go anywhere. The screenplay ultimately never went anywhere. But what it did do was it opened my mind to realizing that there were that my journey wasn't just as an actor anymore, that it was as a storyteller.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the most important stories for you to tell?
For me, I love thrillers. I really like suspenseful stories that really get into the psychological aspect of a character and their mental journey. For me, that's what I gravitate to the most. I'm a huge Hitchcock fan.
Yeah.
So I really gravitate towards that kind of storytelling.
How did you open up your mind to giving yourself permission with writing and directing? Was there a long thought process with that, or was it kind of just like you wrote that screenplay and you're like, oh, I can do more?
I think it's really important to have a good support system. I was very lucky. I had a lot of people around me that were encouraging and, mentored me and guided me, like the guys, like Robin Rodney in Guest House Films. I had people like that to really sort of help me realize that, even though that script, when I go back and I look at it, is so incredibly flawed, there was sort of that support and that encouragement that I had that made me realize I could just keep going. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so I felt like I just always had people behind me sort of rooting me on. And that, I think, is a big part of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense because mentors are key in one's success. And were there standout lessons that they taught you in terms of writing or permission or anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, structure for me was something that I learned really early on to embrace. That was one of the big lessons that I learned. And also to, as a storyteller, you're figuring out the story as you're telling it, as you're sort of developing it. And so I think it's really important to give yourself permission to just really go there, to just really, you can always reel yourself back in, but just really get in deep with the characters and the journey that they're going through, and give yourself permission to, really get in there. And that's something that I learned pretty quickly.
Do a lot of your stories change once you start writing them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things, I think, about storytelling is that you sort of start off with this idea of something, whether it may not even be a fully fleshed idea. It may be a scene or a concept or even a word or something, an exchange that you've seen between two people. And I love how that then turns into what you think the story is going to be. But then once you really start developing it, then it turns into something else. and then it turns into something else, and then it turns into something else. And then by the time you
Yeah.
start shooting it, then it turns into something that you didn't even realize it was going to turn into. And all the while, theoretically, it's getting better and more layered and more complicated. And so to me, that's like the best part of storytelling, is that.
When you're writing and you're figuring out these characters and whatnot, I mean, naturally, we have people in mind that we've met before, when we're creating something, or maybe not.
Mhm.
But do you ever write with a particular performer in mind, or does the screenplay change a bit once it's cast to fit the cadence of someone else's speech, or is that not really a thing for you?
I think it definitely depends on the project and on the characters. I mean, for Devil's Path, for the role of Noah, because Steven was the co-writer and because we were working so closely together, there was a lot of choices that we would make about the character, that because I knew what he was like as an actor.
Okay.
I knew what he was like as a performer, and I knew just what he was like as a person and his, all of his personality traits. So we were able to take his character and kind of mold it a little bit more. With say JD, he came in and the role had already been written, but the thing about a really great actor, and JD is such an incredible actor, they just come in with these choices that they make the words their own. So I feel like you don't even really have to worry about that when you have the right actor. They come in and they make the bold choices. They usually end up making these bold choices that change and shape the character in a way that you can't put on a page. And so I usually lean on that.
Okay. So jumping over to like sets that you've worked on as an actor, are there standout stories in your mind of moments where you learned a valuable lesson, either positive or negative?
Like learn lessons about like production wise and
yeah,
stuff?
well, it could be production wise, human interaction. I know I'm asking like a broad question because you've obviously learned a lot being on set. But
I mean, I feel like one of the first things that you figure out when you start working on set is to try. This seems like such a common sense thing, but for some people it isn't. But you treat the crew with respect.
Yeah.
And like, and the movie would not exist without the crew. And so I feel like that is something that that you figure out, or hopefully you don't have to figure it out. You just know that like you treat everybody with respect. Something that I think I've learned over the years as an actor, and this is before I even realized that I wanted to be a writer or director, is that as the director on a production, you kind of have the weight of the world on you. You certainly have the weight of the production on you.
Yeah.
It's so important to be level-headed. It's so important to just maintain a sense of just calmness about you, even when things are going wrong, and they usually will go wrong at some point.
Right.
It's you're the one who's steering the ship. They're really like the captain, and so I feel like if things start to get rocky and the captain starts freaking out, everybody starts freaking out, and it can just make things so much worse. So it's something that I have seen over the years is some directors tend to really react, sort of initially to situations, and some have figured out how to just sort of keep a level head. And it's the ones that have kept a level head that I have seen the most successful work come out of them.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite failure or like a parent failure that set you up for success?
Well, I mean, that one's kind of easy because we had, I don't know if JD told you, but we had fires in the middle of our production for Devil's Path.
No,
do you know about this?
I didn't know that.
So like the big one for me was that when we were shooting Devil's Path last year, the Santa Rosa fires hit in the middle of us shooting. We had just had 2 days off, and I woke up to our, next week of shooting, and the sky was orange and there was smoke everywhere.
Oh.
And so what had happened was there were these fires that had sprung up, and there were these 60-mile-an-hour winds that spread the wildfires like crazy. overnight, and we ended up having to evacuate. I mean, it was it was a crazy situation.
Oh my Lord.
So at the time, I didn't even know that we were going to finish the movie. I, certainly didn't know if we were going to be able to even get back up to that same, those same property, the two properties where we were shooting at. So when we were all packing up and getting ready and leaving in a big rush, my cinematographer came up to me and said, there's a silver lining here. And at the time I didn't want to hear it, but it was ended up being a very pivotal moment for me. He said, the silver lining is that you get an opportunity that most directors don't have. You get to go over the footage that you've already shot, and you get to see what you may be missing or not missing. And like, you get to look at what you've already done. Like, take that, like, this is an opportunity here. And I didn't want to hear it, but then when I got home and I didn't have anything else to do but go over the footage, I realized that, man, he was really right, because as it turned out, I did have stuff that I was missing. There were things in the production that I hadn't scheduled for that I should have, and I would have ended up having to do reshoots anyway. And so it ended up being kind of a blessing in disguise, if there is one, for this kind of thing. And I was able to figure out, what I needed to really kind of finish this production. And then luckily we were able to get back up there a few weeks later and finish the production. But it was a lesson in perseverance, I think, is what I'm getting around to.
Yeah.
To just keep going, even when you're literally surrounded by fires, reassess. There's always a way around it. You can figure out a way to get to the finish line. It may take making some choices and adapting in a way that you didn't anticipate, but you can get there. You just have to believe that you can.
Yeah. Now, sticking with this perseverance track for a moment, what has that taught you about getting to yes when negotiating or creating a budget or getting something on a project? Have you come up with or learned or created communication skills that help with getting to yes?
Sometimes a no isn't a bad thing. I think that we underestimate the no's. Sometimes the no just turns into a different kind of yes. So for me, it's really about listening to why there's a no and figuring out what isn't working or what isn't being received or whatever it is. And because ultimately, I think we're all talking. We're talking here about production and working on a movie, and it's a collaborative process.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel like it behooves the filmmaker to just listen when the no's come, because rather than just say, "Oh, I didn't get a no," I didn't get a yes. Let me just move on. And it's like, no, I think you should really take that in and figure out maybe why the no. Why the no, and why in that moment, and then you can maybe switch gears or figure out how to go about just communicating it differently, for example.
Yeah. I want to talk about so I want to cover thoughtful storytelling, the storytelling that you're focusing on, the voices that you're giving to people you feel need to have more of a voice. What are your goals in creating these films? Is there like a direction you're heading in terms of like getting individual films done? Do you have a dream of a larger picture? Is this the larger picture?
For me, I think it evolves over time. I didn't even know that I wanted to be a filmmaker several years ago. It just kind of evolved into that, right? It's so odd. But I think that now what's happened is that now that I'm embracing myself as a storyteller and realizing that not only do I have a voice, but what that voice is, I really have gotten very specific about the kind of movies that I want to make and stuff. And the kind of filmmaker that I want to be. And so I feel like where I'm kind of headed is building on my production company, continuing to do the projects that I'm doing on this scale, and then hopefully using that as a launch pad to maybe do something a little bit more mainstream. I love kind of staying in the thriller genre. I think that is definitely my sensibility as a storyteller and as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I think it's something that's really missing right now in filmmaking. As an openly gay filmmaker and actor, something that was really important to me as an actor when I was starting out was that there were roles that were representing the LGBT community, and that we had movies, we had LGBT films out there, and that we were being represented, and that was important. Now we're at a time where that's really shifting, and we're seeing a lot of the LGBT community being represented in the mainstream industry.
Yeah.
So now I think it's really important that we get into genre, that we give ourselves a permission to have, genre films in gay indie cinema, which has not really been done before. It's very rare that you come across those kind of films. So I feel like there's an opportunity for us to kind of just sort of expand our storytelling, if that makes sense.
100%. It makes all the sense in the world. Now, is that so when you're navigating that, and you're basically trailblazing in a way, are you coming up against a lot of resistance, or is it just kind of like people hadn't thought about it? It's like, all right, yeah, sure.
I imagine there's some resistance, but I think that I try not to think of it as resistance as much as I like to think of it as, maybe it's just foreign to people right now. But
Okay.
that's what gay cinema was. Gay cinema was foreign to people, 10, 15 years ago, but now it's becoming very sort of normalized. And so I feel like it's, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. Because, I mean, yeah, it is, I guess, could be taken as foreign to some people. So it's not particularly resistance. It's just they're not used to it. And people can push away what they're not used to.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you give me this very like positive vibe. I get a vibe that it's just you're an optimistic person. Now tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But tell me. And is there a self-talk that you have when keeping yourself positive and optimistic? Has that been taught to you? Is there any thought behind that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's doesn't. I make a conscious effort to be positive about life and situations that come at me, and I think that most people do, even if they don't realize it. It's tough, especially in this industry. There's always something coming at you that wants to knock you down, and that or that it feels like it wants to knock you down. And I feel like it's just really important to. It's really important to believe in yourself. As cheesy as it sounds, nobody else is going to believe in yourself the way that you believe in yourself. And but it's the truth, and you have to keep going. Nobody got to the finish line by dragging their feet. They just kept going. They pushed forward. And so for me, I just try to to hang on to that. And I look to, when I get knocked down or I feel discouraged, which happens often, which I think probably happens often for most creative people. I look to people that I look up to. I look to them for guidance and support when I need it. Everybody needs help once in a while, and so I'm not afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, that's really important. Now, okay, so going into asking for help, with the network, so to speak, you've created of people that you know and the relationships, the professional relationships that come about in the film industry, is there any, do you have any thought behind that in your mind? Like, do you have any opinions or views on that, / things that you're working on now, I would imagine, as a result of people that you've worked with prior on other projects?
Can you say that again?
So, okay, so like, I'm going to shorten it down a little bit. Relationships in the industry. What are your thoughts, feelings, views on professional relationships in the industry?
I think it's really important to I feel like it's so much about relationships. So much of it is about who you meet and who you know and all of that stuff, but not in the not in the very sort of arbitrary surface level kind of way. It's like, I think it's important to not just I'll give you an example. I feel like people talk a lot about networking, and you should get out there and network and meet people but it's not just about that. It's not just about meeting people and whose hand can you shake that's like at the top of the ladder.
Yeah.
It's about building a relationship and then nurturing that relationship, actually getting to know the person, becoming part of their circle, as opposed to looking at people in your networking circle as what can they do for me. I think that, there's enough of that going around, and people can really spot it from far away nowadays. And I think that it's important to really look at how can I help serve this relationship in some way? How can I help this person? And that it always ends up coming back tenfold. And so for me, it's really about nurturing those relationships.
Yeah, that's so true. That's
Yeah.
so true. Okay, so in terms of happiness, what is your definition of happiness?
I think happiness is, again, this may come across a little cliche, but I feel like it's definitely a state of mind, because there are times that I've had more and times that I've had less.
Yeah.
And it's really not, it's hard not to get hung up on when you're the have or the have not. But if you can find a sense of peace and this space within yourself to just allow yourself to take in kind of what is good about what's around you and what you do have around you to help you, then I feel like that is just, I don't know, it's so much more powerful. And I feel like it's so much more inspiring and encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because it can, like, at face value come off very cliche and very like, oh, that's great, but it's so true. The way you're articulating it, it's so true.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to hop over here for a second back to Hitchcock, if you're willing.
Yeah.
I saw what did I just see the other day? I saw The Birds, because I know Halloween had just passed, and I was like, you know what? I want to watch some like good thrillers, and I saw Bates Motel. But I thought the thing that blew my mind was his use of like tying. I mean, like the girls from Phoenix and the birds on the wall. Like even the movie that had nothing to do about birds, he's got an interest in birds, and it's very it's artistic the way his stories are told, even though they are thrillers.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that he does that you love?
There's a lot that he does that I mean, he was considered the master of suspense for a reason. And I feel like for me, I think the thing about Hitchcock that I gravitate to the most is that he's able to create this atmosphere and this sort of overall sense of dread without having to go all gory.
Yeah.
He gets into the psychological aspect of the characters, and that is something that I really dig that stuff. Like he really can get into the underbelly of like a character's journey and their emotional state. And so like nobody else that I've ever seen. And so I feel like that's something that I really kind of gravitated to in terms of his filmmaking. There are things that he does storytelling wise and filmmaking wise from a technical aspect that I really like as well. But yeah, ultimately I think like his sort of use of character development is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I notice he does a really great job of finding places where the pauses carry more weight than the words.
Yeah.
And it's like he says just enough to bring you to the point of like you complete the sentence in your own brain as the viewer. And I feel like that's almost scarier because he's not telling you what to think. Your mind is creating it.
Exactly. He also did that visually too with like, it was always about what you didn't see. He didn't have to show the person bludgeoning the other person. It was like, he always knew how to take you on this visual journey where you knew what was happening. You didn't have to be right in your face, and it was just as it evoked just as visceral of a reaction as if it was right in front of your face.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah. Have you used a lot of any of his stuff, or is that your like number one inspiration for when creating like a screenplay or telling a story?
Yeah, he's probably my number one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just a logistical question: when you're typing up these screenplays, what program do you use?
Final Draft.
Okay. Yeah, I had heard that it does it ties together the index cards right into the program as well when you're creating.
Yeah.
With the notes and everything. I haven't used it yet. It's a program that I definitely want to check out, but I've heard so many good things about it. It's generally, I guess you'd call that industry standard.
Yeah, it's industry standard. It's very user friendly. Also, like it just sort of I mean, you can. There's also Movie Magic. That's also got a lot of really great, so Movie Magic works really well also. But like Final Draft is definitely considered the industry standard. I haven't actually used the note card thing. I usually do those by hand, but I do know that they spit them out automatically. Yeah, it's a pretty cool program.
It's fascinating how easy they can make it. I mean, it's still difficult, but a little easier. Do you have standout moments from top professionals that you've worked with in film? Maybe when you were an actor, standout moments of people who just conducted themselves incredibly professionally.
I've had some like moments in my life where I've met actors or people in the industry kind of before, like when I was younger, and they were interesting. Like, do you remember this show? Do you remember this show called Mr. Belvedere? It was like in the 1980s or something. It was
No, I don't.
Butler. So it's basically a story of this like guy who's this. Anyway, he's like a butler or something, and he's like taking care of the family. Anyway, I used to watch the show religiously. It was just this 30-minute episodic show that they used to show on TV.
Yeah.
And he came to our city for some summer event that they were having, and he came to speak and make an appearance or whatever. And so I remember asking if I could meet him, and so they brought him out, and like I got to shake his hand and everything. And I told him that I wanted to be an actor, and like if he had any advice for me. And his advice was, don't. Whatever you do, don't do it.
Oh no!
If there's anything that you can do, don't. And I was kind of crushed at the time, I'll be honest. But when I look back on it, it's funny now. But like when I look back on it, it did kind of prepare me. In a way, this is probably not the story that you were probably looking for, but it helped me in a way sort of know that you're going to go into an industry that people have a lot of really strong opinions about. And so just be prepared for that and, follow your heart. And so and that's what I did. But
yeah. No, that's definitely any answer you give would be perfect for the question. What did you ever have? Did you ever have any other inclination to do anything else besides act?
No, never. No. Not as far back as I can remember. I've always wanted to. I used to think that when I was really, really little, I thought people lived inside my television set. That's how this whole thing started. And so I really was like fascinated by that and wanted to figure out how I could shrink myself down so that I could live in the television set with these people. And so my dad had to explain to me when I was really little that like, no, these are actors and they, work on a set and this is their job. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. How was it moving out to LA for the first time? Was it difficult? Were you nervous? Was it easy?
I'm sure I was a little nervous, but I was lucky in the sense that I came out here for school. So I already had, it's not like I can't, there's a lot of stories I hear of people that come out here with like $100 in their pocket and a car that's on its last leg and they have no job and nowhere to live. And, they're just coming out here to just sort of see what happens. Well, I had a place to, I was going to school and I had a place to live. I had everything sort of set up for me. So in that sense, it was easy, but in other ways it was overwhelming because I had never been to LA before. I didn't visit the city before I moved here. And so it was just kind of, I remember driving down the 110, coming from the airport and seeing the Hollywood sign for the first time and thinking to myself, oh, wow, it's smaller than I think it is. Because the city is so big and it just goes on and on and on forever.
Right. No, I thought the same thing when I saw it too. Okay, so books. Do you have any gifted books, most gifted books, or favorite books that come to mind on filmmaking or on life?
I read a lot, so I could probably sit here and talk to you about books forever. But some of the more important books, I read a lot of screenplay books because I'm really into screenplay structure. Okay. So anything that has to do with that, I read a lot of those. Like the Writer's Journey is a really good book that I go back to often. Save the Cat, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. I use that book often.
Okay.
Lou Hunter's screenwriting. A lot of there's sort of technical books, but they're books that I feel like really kind of, when I'm writing, part of my problem is that I can just go all over the place. Like my mind just goes everywhere. And so I lean on structure. I lean on things like that. And so that's why I read a lot of these kind of books, because it helps me sort of stay focused and get specific about what story I'm trying to tell. So I like to read a lot of those kind of books. But yeah. I also read a lot of anything that's sort of a thriller book or anything that's weird. If it's a weird book, I'll probably like it.
Okay. Which one? Like what ones are coming to mind?
Well, there's this sort of obscure author named David Ambrose, who has written a number of kind of supernatural thrillers and sci-fi thrillers that kind of, take things like, cloning or parallel universes and kind of, he plays around with that stuff a lot.
Okay. Very good. All right. So as we're getting to the end here, I have two more questions for you. One, in this polarized world of darkness and light, how are you staying in the light?
I think for me it's easy. Storytelling gives me the opportunity, because I think that it's all about balance. I don't think you can always stay in the light. I think that there's a balance between light and dark always. I think it helps you kind of stay grounded. Storytelling for me, filmmaking for me, kind of helps me sort of delve into the dark, so that in my personal life, I can try to keep it as light as possible. I think it's a choice also. I think you have to choose your battles in life. You have to choose what upsets you and what doesn't. You have to choose, what's worth reacting to or responding to in an emotional way. You have to make a choice. And so for me, I try my best anyway to make the choice to stay in the light as much as possible.
Yeah. If you could metaphorically put a word or a phrase on a billboard for millions of people to see, does anything come to mind?
For filmmaking?
Yeah, for filmmaking or advice on life. It can literally be anything.
I think I would say that if you don't know this, it's got to be a word.
Or no, but it can be a word, a phrase, a lyric. I mean, it can literally be as long or as short as you want it to be.
I'd say that if you don't know the struggle, then you lose the strength. That's something that I don't even know where I heard it before, but it's something that I have gone back to this line in my head over and over again, that we become stronger people when we have to muscle through adversity. And so like, I think it's just important to embrace that. I think that's yeah.
It's if you don't know the struggle, could you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. If you don't know the struggle, then you lose the strength. So like, in other words, embrace the struggle. It'll make you stronger.
It does. It really does. Matthew, this has been really great. Thank you for chatting with me. I really appreciate this.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll put like all your contact, where we can find you in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we sign off here?
I guess just that, any storytellers out there, any filmmakers out there, I know it's tough to get started and it's tough to feel like you have the ability or the resources to be able to like break in, but you can, I did. So I feel like, just give yourself the permission to really go there and jump in.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for talking to me today. This has been a wonderful chat.
Thanks, Clay. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Montgomery.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.